In a country where the Constitution protects the right to bear arms, states continue to contemplate ways to take that right away, at least temporarily. Some call the laws extreme risk protection orders. Others call them red flag laws. What they do in general terms is relatively simple. Police or a family member can ask a judge to order a temporary removal of weapons from someone who presents a danger to him or herself or others. 17 states and the District of Columbia have passed some form of red flag legislation. 4 more states have laws under consideration. The laws are not identical, many differ considerably. The president, as he repeated Monday, has shown some support for the idea, but the law does not come without critics. In Colorado, for example, as many as 50 cities and counties run by Republicans have vowed not to enforce the state's red flag law. And even the ACLU has some concerns, suggesting any law must have clear, non-discriminatory criteria for defining persons as dangerous. The worry is, red flag laws could be used to arbitrarily take away a constitutional right. Supporters say the laws could prevent the next mass shooting. And while that's not exactly clear, studies like this one suggest the laws do have an impact on the most common form of gun violence in the U.S. by decreasing a state's rate of suicide by as much as 7 to 14%.